The courtroom gallery erupted in chaos. Camera flashes exploded like grenades. Reporters crushed against wooden barriers, shouting questions that blended into incomprehensible noise. At the center of the storm stood Seo Dae-Hyun, CEO of Hanseong Industries, his expression carved from stone as prosecutors presented evidence of financial connections between his legitimate billion-dollar empire and underground operations that had controlled Seoul's shadows for 3 decades. Mr. Seo, did you authorize illegal fund transfers? Is it true your company launders organized crime money? Will you resign from all positions? He said nothing. His silence was a fortress. But even fortresses fall. Across the city, in a glass tower overlooking the Han River, Yara Kim watched a live broadcast on 6 screens simultaneously. Her fingers moved across her keyboard like a concert pianist, tracking social media sentiment in real time. Negative mentions climbing, stock value plummeting, public trust destroyed. She was the best crisis management consultant in South Korea, brought in by desperate corporations when scandals threatened to devour them whole. She specialized in the impossible. This case was worse than impossible. Welcome to a story about power, pride, and a marriage that was never supposed to mean anything. This is not a love story. This is a survival story. Stay until the end to discover how 2 people forced together by scandal learned that the most dangerous prison is the one built by other people's expectations. If you enjoy complex psychological dramas with strong characters who refuse to be victims, you're in the right place. Let's begin. CEO Dae-Hyun was not supposed to exist in boardrooms. Men like him bore in the shadow districts where street codes mattered more than law, where loyalty was currency and violence was language, were supposed to stay in those shadows. But Dae-Hyun had done what his predecessors never imagined. He had taken a network, the connections, the unspoken power structure that controlled half of Seoul's underground economy, and built a legitimate empire on top of it. Hanseong Industries was real. The construction contracts were real. The technology investments were real. The 15,000 employees were real. But underneath that foundation lay 30 years of organizational history that no amount of corporate restructuring could completely erase. For 10 years, it had worked. He had walked the razor's edge between 2 worlds, gradually shifting resources from illegal operations into legal ventures, transforming blood money into clean capital through legitimate business growth. He attended charity galas. He gave university lectures. He sat on government advisory boards. Then a junior accountant with a conscience had found a single thread and pulled. Financial records showing wire transfers between shell corporations. Patterns suggesting coordination with known criminal figures. Nothing provable in court, but enough to create questions. Enough to make prosecutors interested. Enough to make politicians nervous. The scandal broke on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, 3 major investors had withdrawn. By Thursday, government contracts worth 2 billion won were frozen pending investigation. By Friday, the board of directors was in emergency session, and Dae-Hyun could see the calculation in their eyes. They were deciding whether to sacrifice him to save themselves. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his executive office, hands clasped behind his back, watching the city that had made him and was now preparing to unmake him. His phone buzzed. His chief operating officer, Min-Jun, a man who had followed him from the streets to the boardroom, spoke carefully. The elders are calling for a meeting. Tonight, all family heads. They're concerned about exposure. Dae-Hyun's jaw tightened. The elders, the council of original organization leaders who had grudgingly accepted his transition to legitimate business because it protected them too. As long as Hanseong Industries thrived, it provided employment contracts and laundering opportunities for dozens of connected families. His success was their shield. Now, he had become their vulnerability. "Tell them I'll be there," he said quietly. Dae-Hyun, Min-Jun hesitated. "They're going to ask for guarantees. They're scared that if investigators dig deep enough, everyone gets exposed. They'll want you to contain this." I know what they want. What they wanted was impossible. The investigation had momentum. Public attention had locked on. The only way to satisfy both the prosecutors and the public would be to offer transparency that would destroy the very foundations of a network. He could protect the empire or protect the families, but not both. That night, in a private room of a traditional restaurant in Gangnam, Dae-Hyun faced 9 men who had known him since he was a teenager running errands for corner bosses. Now they looked at him as a threat. Chairman Kwon spoke for them. At 63, he was the oldest, the most traditional, a man who believed in hierarchy and absolute loyalty. His silver hair was immaculate, his suit perfectly tailored, his expression completely unreadable. "We built you, Dae-Hyun. Every connection, every opportunity, every door that opened, we made that possible. Now you bring attention to all of us." "I brought profit to all of you," Dae-Hyun replied evenly. Hanseong Industries has generated more legitimate income for connected families in 10 years than the old operations generated in 30. Clean money, legal money, worthless if it comes with prison sentences. Another elder snapped. Chairman Kwon raised a hand for silence. "We need stability, public confidence, something that changes the narrative from criminal investigation to something else." "What do you suggest?" Dae-Hyun asked, though he already sensed a direction. "Marriage." The word landed like a stone in still water. "Political marriages have stabilized reputations for centuries," Chairman Kwon continued. "The public loves a romance narrative. Scandal becomes love story. Dangerous criminal becomes devoted husband. It's theater, but effective theater. I'm not getting married to save face," Dae-Hyun said flatly. "Not to save face. To save everything." Chairman Kwon leaned forward. "The prosecutors can be managed. The politicians can be negotiated with. But public opinion is destroying you, and public opinion responds to stories. Give them a better story." Another elder added, "We've already identified a candidate. Yara Kim, the crisis consultant your board just hired. American educated, impeccable reputation, respected in corporate circles. A marriage to someone like her signals that you're choosing legitimacy, choosing reform." Dae-Hyun's expression didn't change, but inside, calculation raced. They had planned this before the meeting. This wasn't suggestion. It was a decision they had already made. The only question was whether he would cooperate or be replaced. "And if she refuses?" he asked. Chairman Kwon smiled without warmth. "From what I understand, Ms. Kim's consulting firm is currently managing for major corporate counts, all of which have connections to families represented in this room. I'm sure she'll see the wisdom of cooperation." It was a threat wrapped in silk. Cooperate, or we destroy the career of an innocent woman who happened to be competent enough to catch our attention. Dae-Hyun stood slowly. "I'll consider it." "Consider quickly," Chairman Kwon said. "The prosecution announces its next investigative phase in 3 days. We need the engagement announced before then to shift the media narrative." As Dae-Hyun left the restaurant, Min-Jun fell into step beside him. "You're not actually going to do this, are you?" His COO asked quietly. "What choice do I have?" Dae-Hyun replied, his voice hollow. "If I refuse, they'll replace me and she gets destroyed anyway. If I cooperate, at least I can control some of the damage." "That's not control. That's surrender." "No," Dae-Hyun said, looking up at the Seoul skyline glittering with lights powered by ambitions and compromises. "That's strategy." Meanwhile, Yara Kim was experiencing her own crisis. She sat in her apartment at 2 a.m, surrounded by whiteboards covered in crisis management flowcharts, media strategy timelines, and public sentiment analysis. The Hanseong Industries case was the biggest challenge of her career. It was also completely impossible. Her phone rang. Her business partner, Sophie, calling from New York. "Please tell me you found an angle," Sophie said without preamble. "I've found 17 angles. All of them dead ends." Yara rubbed her temples. "The evidence is circumstantial, but the pattern is clear. He's connected. The question is how connected, and whether he's actively involved or just inherited a legacy he can't escape. Does it matter? Professionally? No. A crisis is a crisis." "But—" Yara trailed off. "But what?" "I met him today. The board wanted me to present preliminary strategy. He sat there for an hour listening to my analysis of how badly he's losing public trust. And he didn't flinch once, didn't make excuses, didn't blame anyone, just asked intelligent questions about what could realistically be salvaged. So he's professional. That's good. So he's either genuinely trying to change, or he's the best actor I've ever met. And I can't figure out which, and that bothers me. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Yara, if this is too complicated, we can recommend another firm. Your reputation is worth more than one client. No, Yara said firmly. If I walk away, it confirms every assumption the media is making. It signals that the case is hopeless. And if it's hopeless, then everyone employed by Han-Seong Industries suffers for crimes they didn't commit. 15,000 people don't deserve unemployment because their CEO has complicated history. Your idealism is going to get you in trouble someday. Probably today, Yara muttered. The board wants a full strategy presentation tomorrow morning at 8. I have 6 hours to create a miracle. She hung up and stared at her whiteboards. The truth was simple and brutal. Public perception wasn't rational. It didn't matter what Dae-Hyun had actually done. What mattered was the story people believed. And right now, the story was Mafia boss pretend to be legitimate businessman. To change that story, she needed a counter-narrative so compelling that it overrode scandal. She had no idea what that could be. At 7:45 the next morning, Yara walked into Han-Seong Industries headquarters carrying 3 presentation boards and a strategy that felt like a house of cards in a windstorm. The boardroom was full, 12 directors for lawyers, the CFO, the COO, and CEO Dae-Hyun at the head of the table. He looked exactly as he had during their first meeting. Impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, posture perfect, expression neutral. But his eyes tracked her with sharp intelligence. She set up her boards and began. Gentlemen, Ms. Director, the situation is this. Public trust is at 11%. Stock value has dropped 43%. 3 major contracts are suspended. Prosecution investigation is expanding. Traditional crisis management, press releases, charity initiatives, transparency pledges will not work here because the public has already decided the narrative. They believe Mr. CEO is exactly what the prosecutor suggests, and no amount of corporate PR will change that perception. One director interrupted. Then what do you propose? Surrender? I propose we change the genre of the story. Silence. Right now, this is a crime thriller. Investigators versus Mafia boss. That's a story where the public wants the criminal caught and punished. We cannot win that story. But if we transform this into a different genre, a redemption story, a romance, a human interest piece, we change what the public wants to see happen. The CFO leaned forward. How do you change a genre? Yara took a breath. She had spent 3 hours working through this idea and still wasn't sure it was anything but desperate. Personal transformation narrative. Mr. CEO isn't a mafia boss hiding behind corporate legitimacy. He's a man from a complicated background who has spent a decade building something real, something legitimate, and is now ready to fully commit to that transformation. The evidence? A major life decision that demonstrates choosing future over past. Such as... Dae-Hyun asked quietly. It was the first time he had spoken. Yara met his eyes. Marriage. To someone who represents everything the public values. Education, ethics, professional integrity. Someone whose reputation is incompatible with criminal enterprise. Someone whose choice to stand aside you signals that your commitment to legitimacy is real. The room erupted. That's manipulation. Who would agree to that? It's a publicity stunt. Dae-Hyun raised one hand, and silence fell immediately. Yara noticed that. The control in the gesture. Who did you have in mind? He asked, still watching her. Yara's stomach dropped, because she hadn't had anyone in mind. This had been a theoretical strategy, a concept to explore. But the way he asked the question, the way the board was looking at her, before she could answer, the door opened. Chairman Kwon walked in, uninvited. Forgive the interruption, he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't asking forgiveness. I've been briefed on Ms. Kim's strategy proposal. It's exactly what we discussed last night, Dae-Hyun. I believe Ms. Kim herself would be the ideal candidate. The air left Yara's lungs. Excuse me, she managed. Chairman Kwon smiled. You're intelligent, accomplished, respected, American educated but Korean heritage. Professional reputation beyond question. Your partnership with Mr. Seo would send precisely the message we need, that Hanseong Industries represents genuine transformation. I'm his crisis consultant, not a Yara started. Your firm currently manages 4 major accounts. Chairman Kwon continued smoothly. All excellent relationships. It would be unfortunate if concerns about professional judgment affected those partnerships. There it was, the threat delivered with perfect politeness. Yara looked at Dae-Hyun. His expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. Anger? Resignation? May I speak with Mr. Seo privately? She asked, her voice carefully controlled. Chairman Kwon gestured graciously. Of course. You have much to discuss. The announcement should be made within 48 hours for maximum impact. He left. The board filed out. Suddenly, the vast boardroom contained only Yara and Dae-Hyun, facing each other across polished wood. You knew, Yara said quietly. Last night, that's what the meeting was about. Yes. And you were going to let me walk into this presentation without warning me? I wanted to see if you would come to the same conclusion independently. Dae-Hyun said. You did, which means it's a sound strategy, even if the execution is insane, Yara supplied. Unethical? A complete violation of personal autonomy. All of those, he agreed, and also our only option. Yara laughed, a sharp sound with no humor. You're serious. You're actually considering this. I don't have the luxury of consideration. This is happening. The only question is whether you cooperate voluntarily or whether they destroy your career and then coerce you anyway. They can't just... Yes, they can. Dae-Hyun stood and walked to the window. You're brilliant at crisis management, Ms. Kim, but you're operating in a world you don't fully understand. The men who run Seoul's power. Structures don't follow the rules you learned in American business schools. They identified you as useful. That makes you valuable as an ally or dangerous as a liability. There's no neutral position. So I should just surrender? Agree to marry a stranger to save both our careers? No. Dae-Hyun turned to face her. You should negotiate the best possible terms for a situation that's going to happen regardless. Yara stared at him. He meant it. This wasn't a request or a proposition. This was reality presenting itself with absolute clarity. What terms? She finally asked. A contract. Specific duration. Specific public requirements. Complete separation of personal life from public performance. You maintain your independence, your career, your identity. This marriage exists for cameras and public perception only. After a reasonable period, say 2 years, we divorce quietly and you walk away with compensation that makes this worth the sacrifice. Money doesn't make this ethical. No. Dae-Hyun agreed, but it makes it survivable. And survival is what we're negotiating. Yara closed her eyes. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to walk out, to call lawyers and fight this. But the cold professional part of her brain was already calculating. Her firm represented 4 major companies. Those contracts employed 17 people. If Chairman Kwon tanked those relationships, she didn't just lose income. Her entire team lost their jobs. And Hanseong Industries employed 15,000 people who had nothing to do with this. I need time to think, she said. You have 12 hours, Dae-Hyun replied. I'm sorry, truly, but that's all the time we have before the decision gets made for us. Yara left the building in a daze. She sat in her car for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to figure out how her life had collapsed into this impossible choice in the span of one presentation. Her phone buzzed. Sophie calling again. How did the presentation go? Yara started laughing. She couldn't stop. It turned into something that might have been crying. Yara, what happened? They want me to marry him, she said when she could speak. That's the crisis management strategy. Me, marriage, public romance to override scandal narrative. Silence on the other end. Sophie, I'm calling our lawyers right now. No. Yara's voice was suddenly steady. No lawyers. I need to think about this strategically. Strategically, this is coercion. Yes, and fighting it legally takes months we don't have and exposes us to exactly the kind of reputation damage they're threatening. If I refuse and fight, I lose everything anyway, but with more collateral damage. So you're just going to agree? Yara looked up at the Hanseong Industries tower, gleaming in morning sunlight. I'm going to negotiate, she said quietly. And then I'm going to survive this, on my own terms. The contract took 6 hours to draft. Yara sat across from Dae-Hyun in his private office. No lawyers present. Just two people negotiating the terms of their mutual imprisonment. 2 years, non-negotiable, Yara said. After that, quiet divorce with a prepared statement about growing apart professionally. No drama, no blame. Agreed, Dae-Hyun replied, making notes. Complete financial separation. I don't touch your money, you don't touch mine. We maintain separate bank accounts, separate investments, separate everything. Agreed. I keep my apartment. You keep yours. We acquire a third property for public purposes, appearances, events, photo opportunities. But neither of us lives there. Dae-Hyun looked up. The public will expect us to cohabitate. Then we lie, like we're lying about everything else in this arrangement. He nodded slowly. Agreed. What about public appearances? Minimum 2 events per week for the first 6 months. After that, once weekly unless specifically required for crisis management. All appearances must be mutually agreed upon at least 48 hours in advance, except for genuine emergencies. What defines an emergency? Death, natural disaster, or corporate collapse. Nothing else. Fair. Dae-Hyun added that to the document. Physical boundaries? Yara had known this would come up, but still felt her chest tighten. No physical intimacy of any kind. Public hand-holding for cameras is acceptable. Brief appropriate kisses for major events only, choreographed in advance. Nothing else. Agreed completely. And if either of us violates terms or becomes uncomfortable with the arrangement, there's a termination clause with 30 days' notice. No. Dae-Hyun set down his pen. The termination clause needs more protection. If one of us walks away abruptly, it destroys the entire purpose of this arrangement and creates worse scandal. I propose a 90-day notice period with mediation required before termination. Yara wanted to argue but recognized the logic. Fine, 90 days with mediation, but the mediator must be mutually selected and have no connections to your family networks. Agreed. They worked through details for another 3 hours. Rules about media interaction, social media presence, family involvement, career decisions. By the time they finished, the contract was 17 pages long and felt more like a business merger than a marriage. Dae-Hyun printed 2 copies. They signed simultaneously. So this is it, Yara said, staring at her signature. We're engaged. In 2 hours, Dae-Hyun corrected. The press conference is scheduled for 6 p.m. My team will release a carefully crafted statement about our relationship developing during professional collaboration. Your team should coordinate messaging. I know how to manage a press conference. I'm sure you do. He paused. For what it's worth, I genuinely am sorry this is happening. Sorry enough to refuse? No. His honesty was startling. I've made peace with doing necessary things that I'm not proud of. This is one of them. Yara gathered her copy of the contract. At least you're honest about it. There are enough lies in this situation already. Between us, there should be truth. It was such an unexpected statement that Yara actually looked at him. Really looked, not just a professional assessment she had been conducting since they met. He was tired. Lines around his eyes suggested sleep hadn't come easily. His posture was perfect but rigid, like a man holding himself together through sheer discipline. Why did you do it? She asked quietly. Build Hanseong Industries. Try to go legitimate. You could have just stayed in the shadows like the others. Dae-Hyun was quiet for a long moment. Because I was 16 when I realized that power built on violence always collapses. Fear is an unstable foundation. I wanted something that could last, something real. And now that reality is built on a lie. Yes, he met her eyes. But most real things are, aren't they? Marriage, corporations, countries. They're all agreed-upon fictions that only work because enough people choose to believe in them. Maybe that's all this is. A fiction we choose to make real. Despite everything, Yara felt something shift in her perception. This man wasn't a simple villain. He was something more complicated and more human. Someone trying to escape gravity he was born into, using the only methods he knew. I should go prepare, she said. Yara. He used her first name for the first time. At the press conference tonight, they're going to ask why we kept this relationship secret. The story is that we wanted privacy while figuring out if this was real. Can you sell that? I'm a crisis management consultant. Selling stories is my profession. That's not what I asked. Yara turned back. Can I pretend to be happy about an engagement that's actually a business contract designed to manipulate public opinion? Yes, Mr. Seo. I can do that. The question is whether you can. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. I suppose we'll find out together. The press conference was a perfectly orchestrated performance. They stood on a small stage in the Hanseong Industries press hall, Yara in a cream-colored dress that her stylist had selected for approachable elegance, Dae-Hyun in a navy suit that softened his usual sharp corporate image. Their hands were linked, his grip firm and warm, hers trying not to tremble. Camera flashes created a strobe effect. Reporters shouted questions. Security maintained careful perimeter control. Dae-Hyun spoke first, his prepared statement perfect. Over the past month, working closely with Ms. Kim on corporate strategy, I discovered someone whose intelligence, integrity, and values align completely with the future I want to build. Today, I'm honored to announce that she has agreed to marry me. Applause erupted. Yara produced a smile that she hoped looked genuine rather than terrified. Ms. Kim, how long have you been involved with Mr. Seo? She had rehearsed this answer 17 times. We met professionally 6 weeks ago, but the relationship developed naturally as we worked together. I'll admit I was skeptical at first. Everyone has seen the news coverage, but getting to know Dae-Hyun beyond public perception showed me someone genuinely committed to building positive change. Are you concerned about his alleged connections to criminal organizations? I've seen Hanseong Industries operations from the inside. I've reviewed financial records, interviewed employees, observed leadership decisions. What I found is a legitimate company employing thousands of people and contributing positively to the economy. I believe in what Dae-Hyun is building, and I believe in him. The lie came smoothly. Too smoothly. Yara felt something hollow open inside her chest. More questions, more practiced answers. The whole event lasted 22 minutes, and by the end, social media sentiment was already shifting. The narrative was changing from criminal investigation to romance during scandal. It was working. That night, alone in her apartment, Yara sat on her bathroom floor and cried. Not from sadness, from the sheer surreal horror of having sold herself so completely. She had stood in front of cameras and proclaimed feelings she didn't have for a man she barely knew, all to protect careers and reputations and corporate structures that suddenly felt meaningless. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dae-Hyun. The performance was successful. Stock recovery already beginning. Thank you for your professionalism. She typed and deleted 4 responses before finally writing back. This doesn't make it right. His response came immediately. No, but it makes it survivable. That's all we have. Yara threw her phone onto her bed and stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her was a stranger. Someone who made impossible compromises. Someone who traded authenticity for strategy. Welcome to marriage, she thought bitterly. Where love is optional but survival is mandatory. The next 6 weeks were a masterclass in controlled deception. They attended charity galas where Dae-Hyun placed his hand on the small of her back with perfect propriety, and Yara smiled like it meant something. They gave joint interviews about their unlikely love story to major publications. They were photographed at restaurants, their body language carefully calibrated to suggest intimacy without actual closeness. And with each performance, the public narrative shifted. The prosecution's investigation continued, but media attention drifted. People were more interested in the romance than the allegations. Stock prices stabilized. Business contract resumed. The strategy was working exactly as planned. But working together daily revealed complexities that Yara hadn't anticipated. Dae-Hyun was intelligent, genuinely so, not just street smart, but intellectually curious. He read constantly. Philosophy, economics, history. During one event setup, she found him in a green room, reading Seneca's letters. Light entertainment? She asked dryly. Stoic philosophy about accepting what you cannot control while focusing on what you can. He looked up with what might have been humor. Seemed appropriate. And what can you control? My response. My choices within constraints. Whether I let circumstances make me bitter or strategic. Which are you? Both, he admitted. Constantly. During a corporate gala 3 weeks into their engagement, a rival CEO made a dismissive comment about Yara being a pre-distraction from real business. Before she could respond, Dae-Hyun intervened with surgical precision. Ms. Kim restructured our entire corporate communication strategy and recovered 40% of lost stock value in 3 weeks. I'd be delighted to hear your company's comparable crisis management results. The rival CEO had no response. Afterward, in the car, Yara said quietly, "You didn't need to do that." "Yes, I did. You're not a prop in this arrangement. You're a partner, however involuntary. That means equal respect." It was such an unexpected statement that Yara didn't know how to respond. The problem was that the lines kept blurring. The contract said this was business, but Dae-Hyun treated her with consideration that felt personal. He remembered that she preferred tea over coffee. He ensured she had quiet space at events when crowds became overwhelming. He asked her opinion on actual business decisions, not just public relations. And worse, she was beginning to respect him, not just professionally, but as a person. He was trying to build something legitimate from impossible foundations. He was trapped by the same system that trapped her, just with different origins. He carried the weight of 15,000 employees' livelihoods and the expectations of families who saw him as either salvation or threat. One night, after a particularly exhausting event, they sat in his car outside her apartment. Rain drummed on the roof. Neither moved to leave. "Can I ask you something?" Yara said quietly. "Of course. Do you ever wish you had just stayed in the shadows? Not tried to build something legitimate? It would have been simpler." Dae-Hyun was quiet for a long time. "Every day," he finally said. "But simple isn't the same as right. I've done things I'm not proud of. I've made choices that haunt me. Building Seoul Industries doesn't erase that, but it's the only redemption I know how to attempt. And if it fails, if the prosecution finds something damning, if public opinion turns again, then I fail," he said simply. "But I'll fail trying to build rather than hiding." Yara looked at his profile in the dim light. "That's either very brave or very stupid. Probably both." She laughed despite herself. "We have that in common. Then this whole arrangement is brave stupidity. Or stupid bravery." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to rain, and Yara realized with quiet alarm that this felt more real than any of the performances they had choreographed for cameras. The rival move came exactly when Dae-Hyun's intelligence network predicted it would. 3 months into the engagement, when public sentiment had stabilized but before legal legitimacy was fully established. Yara was in her office reviewing quarterly reports when Dae-Hyun called her directly, which violated their agreement about maintaining separation during work hours. "Turn on financial news," he said without preamble. "Channel 7. She pulled up the stream. A breaking news banner scrolled across the screen. Hostile takeover attempt. Shinwa Group announces intention to acquire controlling interest in Seoul Industries. Yara's crisis management instincts activated immediately. Shinwa Group, real estate conglomerate, conservative leadership, excellent political connections. They're offering 40% above current share price," Dae-Hyun finished. "It's a brilliant move. Shareholders will be tempted by the premium. Our board will have fiduciary duty to consider seriously. Can you block it?" "Not legally, but I can make it strategically undesirable." His voice shifted. "I need you at headquarters in 20 minutes. Emergency board session." Yara was already grabbing her tablet and jacket. What's the play? Demonstrating that Hanseong Industries is worth more intact than acquired. I need your crisis management perspective on corporate messaging. She made it to headquarters in 18 minutes. The boardroom was chaos. Directors arguing, lawyers reviewing defensive options, financial advisors running acquisition scenario models. Dae-Hyun stood at the head of the table, an island of calm in the storm. When Yara entered, every head turned. Ms. Kim, the CFO said with barely concealed frustration, "This is a board matter." Ms. Kim is family. Dae-Hyun interrupted smoothly. And more importantly, she's a strategic mind who stabilized our public reputation. If we're going to convince shareholders that staying independent is better than accepting a premium buyout, we need her expertise. It was a power play wrapped in introduction, and everyone in the room recognized it. Dae-Hyun gestured to the presentation screen. Shinwa Group is offering 40% premium because they believe they can strip our assets, terminate our workforce, and redevelop our properties for higher profit. They're betting that shareholders care more about immediate payout than long-term value. Some shareholders do. One director said bluntly, "What's your counter?" Dae-Hyun looked at Yara. She stepped forward, her mind racing through options. We give shareholders something more valuable than money. We give them legacy. Explain, the CFO demanded. Hanseong Industries isn't just a company. It's 15,000 jobs, community investment, the transformation of an entire business sector. Shinwa Group's proposal is liquidation disguised as acquisition. We counter by showing shareholders what they'd be destroying versus what they could build. Not just financial projections, but impact. Real stories. Real people whose lives depend on this company continuing to exist. That's emotional manipulation. A director objected. Yes, Yara agreed. And it works. Because humans aren't rational economic actors. We're emotional decision makers who rationalize afterward. Shinwa Group is selling profit. We sell purpose. Dae-Hyun was watching her with complete focus. Tactical implementation, multi-platform campaign, video testimonials from employees, community leaders speaking about Hanseong Industries' local investment, economic analysis showing that maintaining independence generates better long-term returns than liquidation. We frame this as a choice between quick profit and sustainable growth. The room was silent for 3 seconds. Then the CFO said, "How fast can you execute this?" 72 hours to full deployment. Yara replied, "But I need complete access to employee communications, community partnership records, and financial transparency that goes beyond what we've shown publicly." Done. Dae-Hyun said immediately. Another director frowned. That level of transparency could reveal information we've kept private. We're past the point of half measures. Dae-Hyun cut him off. Shinwa Group is offering certainty. We're offering potential. Potential requires proof. Ms. Kim gets whatever she needs. Yara spent the next 3 days barely sleeping. She interviewed 47 employees, from assembly line workers to senior engineers. She spoke with community leaders in the districts where Hanseong Industries had built schools and medical clinics. She worked with the finance team to create projections that were aggressively optimistic but defensively realistic. And she discovered something unexpected. Dae-Hyun's transformation wasn't performance. The community investments were real. The employee development programs were genuine. The shift from shadow operations to legitimate business had been thorough and methodical over 10 years. He had actually done it, built something real from criminal foundations. On the second night, at midnight, she found him in his office, staring at architectural plans. "What are those?" she asked. "Redevelopment proposal for Dongdaemun District," he said. Low-income housing combined with commercial space. Profitable but also provide affordable units. I've been working on it for 3 years, trying to get zoning approval. Will Shinwa Group continue this project if they acquire the company? No. They'll demolish everything and build luxury condos. Higher profit margin. Yara looked at the plans. Detailed, thoughtful. Clearly the product of someone who cared about outcomes beyond profit. "You're not what I expected," she said quietly. "What did you expect?" A criminal hiding behind corporate structure. But you're actually trying, genuinely trying to build something better. Dae-Hyun set down the plans. Trying doesn't erase history. No, but it means something anyway. They worked side by side until 3 a.m., refining presentations, checking data, preparing for the shareholder meeting that would determine everything. And somewhere in those hours, the nature of their partnership shifted. It wasn't contractual obligation anymore. It was actual collaboration, mutual respect, maybe even trust. The shareholder meeting was a battlefield disguised as corporate governance. Shinwa Group sent their CEO, a smooth political operator named Director Park, who had built his career on hostile acquisitions. He presented first, his pitch perfectly crafted. Hanseong Industries shareholders deserve reward for their patience during scandal and investigation. My offer provides 40% premium on current value, immediate payout, guaranteed completion within 60 days. This is certain profit versus uncertain future. Polite applause. Shareholders leaning forward with interest. Then Dae-Hyun stood. Director Park offers money, he began. I offer legacy. The presentation Yara had created began playing on screens around the room. Employee testimonials. Not scripted corporate messages, but real people talking about what Hanseong Industries meant to them. A single mother who had been promoted from assembly line to engineering supervisor. A young man whose technical training program had given him skills that changed his family's economic trajectory. A grandmother whose community medical clinic was funded by corporate partnership. Shinwa Group's proposal liquidates these stories. Dae-Hyun continued. Terminates these opportunities. Transforms 15,000 jobs into severance packages and real estate opportunities. That is their right. But shareholders should understand what they're selling. More testimonials. Community leaders discussing infrastructure projects, educational programs, economic development that had revitalized struggling districts. Then the financial analysis. Projections showing that Hanseong Industries' growth trajectory over 5 years would generate returns exceeding the acquisition premium. Not guaranteed, but probable. I cannot promise certainty, Dae-Hyun said. I can only promise continuation, growth, commitment to building something that matters beyond quarterly returns. He paused, and Yara recognized a moment of vulnerability he was choosing to show. 10 years ago, I inherited a network built on fear and control. I've spent a decade transforming that foundation into something legitimate. That transformation isn't complete. Investigations continue. Questions remain. But the direction is clear. Hanseong Industries is becoming what I always intended, a company that creates value through contribution rather than extraction. Silence in the room. Shareholders have a choice. Certain profit now, or potential legacy later. I respect either decision. I only ask that you understand what you're choosing. The vote took 2 hours. When results were announced, Dae-Hyun had won by 54%. It was close, dangerously close, but it was victory. Afterward, in the private executive office, Dae-Hyun stood at the window with his back to Yara. Thank you, he said quietly. We had a contract, she replied. This was professional obligation. No, he turned to face her. This was beyond any contract. You could have delivered adequate strategy. You delivered something exceptional because you chose to believe that what we're building matters. I believe that 15,000 employees matter, Yara corrected. I believe that community investment matters. I believe that trying to do better than your origins matters. And me? Do I matter? The question caught her completely off guard. I don't know how to answer that. Then don't, Dae-Hyun said. But know that you matter to me, not as crisis management consultant, not as contractual obligation, as a person whose intelligence and integrity I genuinely respect. Yara felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. The boundary between performance and reality was dissolving, and she didn't know how to rebuild it. We should maintain professional distance, she said, hating how uncertain her voice sounded. You're right. Dae-Hyun turned back the window. But we should also be honest about what's changing between us, even if we don't act on it. What was changing was everything, and they both knew it. But external forces don't pause for internal confusion. 2 days after the shareholder victory, Chairman Kwon requested a meeting, not with Dae-Hyun, with Yara. They met in a traditional tea house in Insadong, one of those establishments that look humble from outside but cost more per hour than most people earned in a day. Chairman Kwon poured tea with precise ceremony. "You've been valuable, Ms. Kim. More valuable than I anticipated." "Thank you." Yara wasn't sure if that was compliment or assessment. The marriage strategy has worked exactly as intended. Public perception stabilized. Stock recovered. Investigation momentum slowed. He sipped tea. But the original purpose was temporary stabilization, not transformation. Yara's instincts went alert. "I'm not sure I understand." Dae-Hyun is becoming too independent, too focused on legitimate business, too willing to cut ties with networks that built him. Chairman Kwon's expression was perfectly pleasant. That's problematic for families who depend on those connections. He's building a legal company. That should be positive. For him, perhaps. For us, it's abandonment. We need those connections maintained. We need someone who ensures Dae-Hyun remembers his obligations. The implication landed like ice water. "You want me to be your informant," Yara said flatly. "I prefer advisor. You have access to his business decisions, his strategies, his plans. Simply ensure that family interests are protected as he pursues his transformation. And if I refuse, then you become a liability rather than an asset, and liabilities are managed accordingly." Yara set down her tea with careful control. "You're threatening me." "I'm explaining reality. You entered this world voluntarily when you signed that engagement contract. The world has rules. One rule is that everyone serves the network's interests or they're replaced. Dae-Hyun will do exactly what he's always done. What's necessary to protect the people he cares about. If protecting you requires compliance with family requests, he'll comply. If it requires ending this engagement, he'll end it." Chairman Kwon smiled without warmth. "The question is what you'll do when faced with the same choice." Yara left the tea house feeling contaminated. The trap had just revealed another layer. She had thought the contract marriage was the limit of coercion, but coercion was infinite. Each compliance created new obligations, new pressures, new ways to be controlled. That night, she called Dae-Hyun and asked to meet, somewhere private, somewhere they could speak without surveillance. They met in a public park 11 p.m., walking paths lit by street lamps, speaking quietly. "Chairman Kwon wants me to be his informant," Yara said without preamble. "Monitor your decisions. Report anything that threatens family interests." Dae-Hyun's expression didn't change, but his hands clenched. "When did this happen?" "This afternoon." He was very polite, very clear. "Cooperate or be eliminated as a problem." "I'll handle it." "No." Yara stopped walking. "Don't. I need to understand something first. Is he right? Would you sacrifice me to protect family stability?" "That's not a fair question." "It's the only question that matters." Dae-Hyun was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and intense. 6 months ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Protecting the network meant sacrificing individuals when necessary. That was the calculation I understood. He turned to face her. "But you changed that calculation. Not intentionally, just by being exactly who you are. Intelligent, ethical, refusing to compromise your integrity, even when it would be easier. You made me remember why I started this transformation in the first place." "That's not an answer." "No, I would not sacrifice you, even if it cost me everything, even if it destroys what I built. Because if I sacrifice you to protect a system that demands that kind of sacrifice, then I've learned nothing and become exactly what I was trying to escape." Yara felt something crack open inside her chest. The last protective wall she had been maintaining between contractual obligation and actual emotion. "I believe you," she said quietly, "which is terrifying because that means this is real now. What we're doing, what we're building, it's not performance anymore." "No," Dae-Hyun agreed. "It's not." They stood in silence, the weight of that admission settling between them. "So, what do we do?" Yara asked. "We stop playing by their rules," Dae-Hyun said. Chairman Kwan thinks he controls the situation because he's always controlled me through obligation and threat. But obligation only works if you accept the premise. What if we simply refuse? Refuse how? Full transparency. Complete transformation. We take every connection to shadow operations, every compromised relationship, every questionable practice, and we burn it all down. Replace it with legitimate structures that don't depend on family networks. That's corporate suicide, Yara said. You'll lose half your business connections overnight. Then I'll rebuild with the half that remains. Better to build smaller on solid foundation than larger on corruption. The families will retaliate. Let them. Dae-Hyun's voice was steel. I spent 10 years compromising, accommodating, trying to gradually shift away from shadow operations while maintaining enough connection to stay protected. It's never enough. There's always another demand, another obligation, another compromise. The only way out is complete severance. Yara looked at him, really looked at this man who was proposing to destroy everything he had built rather than continue compromising. That's insane, she said. Probably. It's also the first genuinely honest thing anyone has proposed since this entire situation began. Does that mean you'll help me? Yara took a breath. We'll need a plan. A real one, not just defiant gestures. Legal protection, financial restructuring, public relations strategy that frames this as transparency rather than collapse. Can you build that plan? I'm a crisis management consultant. Building plans for impossible situations is literally my profession. Something that might have been hope flickered across Dae-Hyun's face. Then we have a chance. A small chance, Yara corrected, against overwhelming opposition, with consequences neither of us can fully predict. Is that a yes? Yara laughed despite the gravity of the situation. That's a yes. But we do this together. No more secrets. No more protected information. If we're burning bridges, we both hold the torch. Agreed. They shook hands formally, and it felt more binding than any contract they had signed. Building a plan to dismantle a 30-year criminal network while transforming it into legitimate business took 6 weeks of intensive work. Yara recruited lawyers specializing in corporate restructuring and criminal compliance. Dae-Hyun worked with financial advisors to identify which business connections were genuinely clean versus which depended on shadow network support. They mapped every obligation, every compromise, every questionable practice. The picture that emerged was more complicated than simple good versus evil. Many of the family businesses had themselves been transitioning toward legitimacy. They employed thousands of people. They contributed to communities. But they also maintained connections to illegal operations as protection against rivals and law enforcement. We can't just burn everything, Yara said, reviewing the network map. Half these businesses are borderline legitimate. If we expose them completely, we destroy innocent employees along with corrupt leadership. So what do you propose? Structure exposure with protection for innocence. We offer businesses a choice. Complete transition to legitimate operations with legal support, or full exposure and severance. Give them 30 days to decide. Dae-Hyun considered. That give them time to retaliate against us. Yes, but it also give them time to make real changes. We're not trying to destroy people. We're trying to transform a system. You're more idealistic than I am. One of us has to be. They spent another week refining the proposal. Legal frameworks for businesses that chose transition. Protection agreements for employees who cooperated with investigations. Public transparency about Hanseong Industries' own history and transformation process. It was aggressive, risky, possibly suicidal. But it was also the first completely honest approach either of them had seen to problem. The night before they planned to present the proposal to the board and simultaneously to the families and prosecution, Dae-Hyun asked Yara to meet him at the property they had acquired for public purposes. She hadn't been there since the purchase. It was a modern apartment in Gangnam, expensively furnished in the impersonal style of properties meant for magazine photographs rather than actual living. Dae-Hyun was waiting in the living room, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. I need to tell you something before tomorrow, he said. Something you deserve to know before we move forward. Yara sat down, her heart rate accelerating. What is it? The original scandal, the one that started all of this, wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated by me. The world tilted. What? I arranged for the accountant to find those financial records. I leaked information to prosecutors. I created the crisis that forced the engagement. Yara stood up, her voice shaking. You manufactured the entire situation? Not the connections themselves. Those were real, but the exposure was deliberate. I knew the families would force a marriage solution. I knew they would identify you as the ideal candidate. I engineered circumstances to bring us together. Why would you do that? Dae-Hyun's expression was raw with something that might have been guilt or hope or both. Because I had been trying to escape the network for 10 years and failing. Every attempt at independence just created new obligations. I needed a catalyst that was powerful enough to force complete transformation. You were that catalyst. You used me, Yara said, her voice hollow. Yes, you ruined my agency, threatened my career, forced me into a fake marriage, all because you needed a strategic partner in your escape plan. Yes, Dae-Hyun didn't flinch from her anger, and I knew from the beginning that when you eventually learned the truth, you would have every right to walk away. That's why I'm telling you now, before we go public tomorrow, because you deserve the choice that I never gave you initially. Yara felt something cold settle in her chest. All of it, the entire relationship, the collaboration, the growing trust, had been built on manipulation from the start. Why tell me now, she demanded. Why not just let me continue believing this was circumstance? Because tomorrow we present a plan built on complete honesty. If I'm asking businesses to confess their criminal histories and transform, I need to confess mine. Starting with you. You deserve truth, even if truth means you leave. And if I do leave, if I walk away from all of this tonight, then I continue alone, or fail alone, but at least I fail honestly. Yara turned away from him, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. Every conversation, every shared moment of collaboration, every growing feeling, all of it contaminated by the knowledge that she had been a strategic tool from the beginning. And yet, you're right, she said quietly, not looking at him. I should leave. I should walk out of here, terminate the engagement, expose everything you've done, and destroy you exactly as thoroughly as you manipulated me. I would understand. But I'm not going to. Dae-Hyun went very still. What? Yara turned back to face him. Because everything you said is true, and I'm so angry I can barely see straight. And I also recognize that you manufactured circumstances, but not my choices within them. You created the crisis. You didn't create my response. Every decision I made to help you, to build this plan, to believe in transformation, those were my choices. And I choose to continue making them. Even knowing I manipulated you? Yes, because the alternative is abandoning 15,000 employees and dozens of businesses and a genuine chance at systemic transformation just to punish you for strategic deception. And that would be spite, not justice. You're remarkable, Dae-Hyun said quietly. No, I'm practical and furious and somehow still committed to this insane project despite knowing I was recruited rather than randomly selected. She took a breath. But going forward, no more secrets. No more strategic manipulation. If we're partners, we're actual partners. Complete transparency. Agreed. And you owe me, massively. We will discuss appropriate compensation for emotional damages at some future point when I'm less angry. Absolutely fair. They stood facing each other across the impersonal living room of the apartment neither of them actually lived in. The entire foundation of their relationship exposed and somehow still standing. Tomorrow's going to be a disaster, Yara said. Almost certainly. We could still stop this. Present a modified plan that doesn't burn quite so many bridges. We could, Dae-Hyun agreed. But we won't, because you chose integrity over safety, and now I have to live up to that standard. Don't make this about me. This is about you choosing to finish what you started 10 years ago. Can it be both? Despite everything, Yara felt a smile tugging at her lips. I suppose it has to be. The presentation happened simultaneously in 3 locations: the Hanseong Industries boardroom, the family council meeting hall, and the prosecutor's office. Dae-Hyun stood in the boardroom, Yara beside him, as they presented the full transformation proposal on screens visible to remote participants. For 10 years, Dae-Hyun began, Hanseong Industries has operated in a gray zone between legitimate business and shadow network connections. Today, that ends. We are implementing complete structural transformation with full legal compliance and transparency. The family council representatives erupted in protest through video connection. Chairman Kwan's face was a mask of controlled fury. This is betrayal. This is evolution, Dae-Hyun interrupted. Every business connected to the network received the same offer: 30 days to implement complete transition to legitimate operations with legal support or full severance and exposure. No middle ground. No compromises. You'll destroy everything. No, I'll transform everything. Businesses that choose transition keep their operations, their employees, their community standing. They simply operate legally. Businesses that refuse will be documented and reported to appropriate authorities. On another screen, the lead prosecutor was reviewing the massive documentation package Yara's team had prepared: financial records, business connections, historical operations, everything. This is comprehensive, the prosecutor said, clearly stunned. Complete transparency, Yara confirmed. Mr. CEO is providing evidence of all historical operations in exchange for structured transition agreements for businesses that cooperate. This isn't immunity. It's accountability with pathway to reform. The boardroom directors were split. Half looked horrified at the legal exposure. Half looked cautiously hopeful. The CFO spoke carefully. If we implement this plan, we lose approximately 40% of current business relationships. In the short term, Dae-Hyun agreed, but we gain legal stability, public trust, and freedom to pursue growth without constant exposure risk. The calculation is simple: smaller clean operation versus larger vulnerable one. What about retaliation? A director asked. The families won't accept this quietly. No, they won't, Dae-Hyun said, which is why we've coordinated with law enforcement for protective arrangements and why all documentation is already in prosecution hands. Retaliation becomes additional criminal exposure. Chairman Kwan's voice cut through the video connection. You're making an enemy of everyone who built you, Dae-Hyun. I'm offering everyone who built me a chance to rebuild legitimately. That you perceive partnership as enemy status reveals exactly why this transformation is necessary. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Votes were taken, agreements negotiated, legal frameworks established. By the end, Hanseong Industries had committed to complete transformation. Businesses had 30 days to decide. Prosecutors had documentation for investigations. The news media had the biggest corporate scandal to reform story in a decade. Yara watched it all with the analytical detachment of a crisis manager who had just orchestrated controlled demolition of an entire power structure. When the final votes were recorded and the virtual participants disconnected, the boardroom emptied except for Dae-Hyun and Yara. We did it, she said quietly. We started it. Dae-Hyun corrected. Implementation will take years. Some businesses will choose transparency. Others will fight. The legal process will be complicated, but the direction is set. Yes. They stood together looking out at Seoul skyline, a city built on 1,000 compromises, 10,000 ambitions, and a constant tension between what was and what could be. What happens to us? Yara asked. The contract was for 2 years. We're 6 months in. Do we continue performance or? I don't know, Dae-Hyun admitted. What we built was supposed to be strategic fiction, but it became something real, at least for me. Yara turned to look at him. Define real. Respect, trust, partnership that extends beyond contractual obligation. He met her eyes. Feelings I wasn't supposed to develop for someone I recruited as a strategic tool. That's incredibly unfair, Yara said. You don't get to manipulate someone into your life and then develop genuine feelings. I know. I'm sorry. And you don't get to apologize and expect forgiveness. I know that too. And you definitely don't get to look at me like that when I'm trying to maintain professional distance. How am I looking at you? Like I matter. Like this matters. Like we accidentally built something real while pretending. All of that is true, Dae-Hyun said quietly. Yara took a breath. I don't forgive you for the manipulation. I don't know if I ever will completely. But I also recognize that we both changed through this process. You're not the same person who engineered that initial crisis. I'm not the same person who agreed to a contract marriage. We both become something different together. What does that mean for us going forward? It means we renegotiate. Again, not a contract this time, an actual choice. Do we want to continue this relationship authentically, without performance, without strategic benefit, just as two people who accidentally found partnership in chaos? Yes, Dae-Hyun said immediately. Absolutely yes. I'm going to need time to process everything. The manipulation, the transformation, all of it. I can't just instantly transition from contractual obligation to genuine relationship. I understand. Take whatever time you need. But I'm not walking away, Yara added, because despite everything, despite the manipulation and the anger and complexity, I believe in what you're trying to build, and I believe in the person you're trying to become. And somehow, against all logic, I believe in us. That's all I can ask. It's more than you deserve, Yara said, but apparently I'm generous with second chances. Dae-Hyun smiled, a real smile, not the controlled expression he wore for cameras. I promise to deserve it eventually. You'd better. The transformation was messy and complicated, and sometimes felt impossible. 18 businesses chose legitimate transition. 14 refused and were documented for prosecution. 3 family heads were arrested. Chairman Kwon disappeared to Taiwan and fought extradition. Han Seong Industries lost 38% of revenue the first quarter, then stabilized, then began growing again with clean contracts and transparent operations. Dae-Hyun testified in multiple investigations, providing evidence that led to comprehensive reform of corporate oversight regulations. He was never charged criminally but paid substantial fines for historical violations. Yara's consulting firm became the leading expertise in corporate transformation and criminal network transition. She hired 17 new consultants and opened offices in 3 cities. Their relationship remained complicated. They moved slowly, rebuilding trust that had been compromised by manipulation, learning to separate performance from authenticity. Some days were easy. Some days, the weight of history made everything difficult. But they continued. One evening, standing on a bridge overlooking the Han River at sunset, Dae-Hyun asked Yara a question. If you could go back to the moment before the scandal broke, knowing everything you know now, would you change anything? Yara considered. I would demand better contract terms initially, better compensation, clearer boundaries. That's fair. But I wouldn't change the fundamental choice. Because this experience, as manipulated and complicated and sometimes horrible as it was, gave me purpose beyond crisis management. It showed me that transformation is possible even from terrible foundations, that people can choose to become better than their origins, that integrity isn't about perfection, but about consistent effort to improve. You've gotten philosophical in your old age, Dae-Hyun teased. I'm 29. That's not old. Ancient. Practically retirement. She elbowed him. He caught her hand. It was such a simple gesture, but so different from the choreographed touches of their performance marriage. What about you? Yara asked, would you change anything? I would have been honest from the beginning, Dae-Hyun said immediately. I would have approached you as a consultant rather than manufacturing crisis. I would have trusted that you might choose to help me rather than forcing circumstances that left you no choice. Why didn't you? Because I was still operating from a worldview where people needed to be controlled rather than trusted. You taught me different. I didn't teach you anything. You learn by choosing to change. Can it be both? Yara smiled. I suppose it has to be. They stood together watching sunset paint the river gold. 2 people who had been forced together by manipulation and scandal and strategic calculation, who had chosen to stay together through transparency and effort and the stubborn belief that transformation was possible. The marriage was real now, not because of contracts or public performance, but because they had built something genuine from impossible foundations. It wasn't a love story. Not exactly. It was something more complicated and more honest. A partnership forged in crisis, tested by truth, and sustained by the choice to keep choosing each other despite knowing exactly how flawed and difficult and imperfect they both were, which was, in its own way, the most real kind of love there was. And that's where we'll end this story. Not with perfect resolution, but with honest continuation. Because real transformation doesn't happen in dramatic climax moments. It happens in daily choices, in consistent effort, in the decision to keep building something better even when it's difficult. If you enjoyed this story of power, pride, and unexpected partnership, please hit that like button and subscribe for more complex psychological dramas. Drop a comment letting me know. Do you prefer stories with strong, independent female leads who challenge expectations, or do you lean more toward traditional romance narratives? Your feedback shapes what stories I tell next. And if you want to see more of Dae-Hyun and Yara's journey, the messy middle parts of transformation, the court cases, the family confrontations, the slow rebuilding of trust, let me know. Part 2 could explore what happens when the public facade drops and they have to actually live the relationship they've been performing. Thank you for staying until the end. Remember, the most powerful prisons are the ones built by other people's expectations. Break free.